Hello, and welcome to Introduction to Business series of lectures. My name is Nadejda Kim, and today I'll explain the basic concepts related to market and economy. So let us start. So economic affects our daily lives. We're continuously being made aware about the local, national, and international events, such as price increases, fluctuations in exchange rates, changes in interest rates, recessions, unemployment, and the effects of globalization. We're continuously facing economic problems and decisions on our own. What should I buy in the supermarket? Should I save up for a summer holiday? Or should I spend more on a day-to-day living? Should I go to the university, or should I try to find a job now? So if I go to university, should I work part-time? So in the following lecture, I'll explain the four main concepts. So first of all, what are the types of economic systems? What are the macroeconomic factors that affect the business performance? So how the market prices are determined, and how the government influences the economic conditions. So let us start with the first one. So all societies are faced with a problem of economic scarcity. However, they differ considerably in the way they tackle the problem. So one important difference between societies is the extent to which the government controls the economic conditions. That is, the degree to which the government decides what, how, and for whom to produce. So at the one extreme lies the completely planned or common economy, where all the economic decisions are made by the government. So the common economy is usually associated with the socialist or communist economic systems, where resources are collectively owned and the state plans the allocation of those resources. Government decides the allocation of resources on three important levels. So first of all, it decides between the current consumption and investment for the future. The state decides the level of output for each industry and firm, the techniques to be used in production, and the resources required for each industry and firm. And finally, the government decides about the final distribution of output among consumers. At the other extreme lies the free market economy, where all economic decisions are made by firms and individuals without government intervention. So, for example, the more efficiently the firms combine the factors of production, the more profit they gain. The more efficiently workers work, the higher their wages and more secure their jobs will be. And finally, the more carefully consumers decide what to buy, the more value for money they gain. So thus, people pursuing their own self-interest through buying and selling decisions in competitive markets helps to minimize the problem of economic scarcity and through efficient use of resources. Because of the problems associated with the free market and totally planned economies, most of the real-world economies are a mixture of two. So, for example, in the former communist countries of Eastern Europe, the government played a much larger role compared to the United States, where the government plays a smaller role. You may notice that on the spectrum there has been the general movement towards the right from the centrally planned economy to free market economy since the early 1980s. In the former communist countries, this has been the result of abandonment of the central planning model, adoption of the private enterprise. In the Western countries, this has been the result of deregulation of the private industry and privatization. Economics is traditionally divided between macroeconomics and microeconomics, meaning macro big and micro small. Macroeconomics is concerned with the aggregate demand, that is the total spending on national output, and aggregate supply, that is the total national output of goods and services. On the other hand, microeconomics is concerned with the individual parts of the economy. It is concerned with the demand and supply for particular goods and services, such as cars, electricity, haircuts, and others. So some of the companies are more sensitive to changes in economic conditions. So, for example, the demand for fast food is not very sensitive to changes in economic conditions, because when the economy is weak, people still purchase the food. So by contrast, the demand for new automobiles and also the performance of car manufacturers may be more sensitive to changes in economic conditions, because when the economy is weak, people tend to buy less new cars. So economic growth represents the general level of economic activity. Sometimes the economic growth is strong, sometimes it is weak. So the government aims to achieve and sustain the high rates of economic growth over a long period of time, so that it is not just a temporary phenomenon. So by inflation, we mean the general increase in the price levels throughout the economy. So the government aim here is to keep the inflation rate stable and low. And governments usually have the target rate of inflation rate. So interest rates determine the cost of borrowing the money for a firm, and therefore it affects the firm's performance by influencing its operating expenses and revenues. So what is the impact of the strong economy? When the economy is strong, then more jobs are created. As more jobs are created, people receive the higher levels of income, and therefore they increase their spending on national goods and services. And therefore firms facing the high demand for their goods and services increase the level of employment. In addition, investors tend to earn high incomes when the economic growth is high. When the economy is weak, many of the workers tend to be laid off by firms, and therefore they have less money to spend on goods and services. Other workers, fearing the layoff, may save up more in case they are laid off. Thus, the demand for many goods and services tend to fall, which means this has a negative influence on company performance. For example, when the demand for new cars declines, the company may respond by laying off workers and even shut down the plants. But how do we measure the national income or output? So this measure is called the gross domestic product, or GDP. So there are three main methods to measure the GDP. So first of all, it is the product method. In this, we add up the value of all the goods and services produced in the economy, industry by industry. And in this way, we focus on firms. Adding up all of these incomes in the forms of wages, salaries, profits, and rents constitutes the income method. And the expenditure method focuses on expenditures necessary to purchase the nation's production. GDP thus can be calculated in three ways, but all of them result in the same figure, which means that national product equals national income and equals national expenditure. Businesses monitor various types of unemployment rates to see whether economic conditions are improving. And there are four main types of unemployment. Frictional or natural unemployment represents the people who are between the jobs. In other words, this unemployment type is temporary because people will likely to find jobs soon. So seasonal unemployment represents people whose services are not needed during particular seasons. So for example, ski instructors may not be employed during summer. So cyclical unemployment represents people who are unemployed because of the poor economic conditions. During recession periods when economy is weak, the demand for goods and services tend to be low, which means that firms are negatively influenced and therefore they tend to lay off the workers. Conversely, when the economic state is improving, the demand for goods and services grow, which means that employment rates also increase. So all the four types of employment rates, the cyclical unemployment is the best indicator of economic conditions. So and finally, the structural unemployment represents the people who are unemployed because of their limited skills. People with a limited education may be an example of structural unemployment. So inflation represents the increase in the general level of prices in the national economy. Consumer Price Index indicates the prices on a wide variety of consumer products, such as gasoline, housing, electricity, medical services, and many others. So there are two types of inflation, that is cost-push inflation and demand pull inflation. The inflation can affect the firm's operating expenses by influencing the cost of supplies and materials. So when the price of aluminium increases, the companies such as Coca-Cola may incur the high costs, and therefore they may increase the prices for soft drinks. When the price of steel increases, automobile manufacturers may incur high cost of production. So in this way, when firms charge higher prices because of the increase in the cost of production, this results in the cost-push inflation. Inflation can be also caused by strong consumer demand during periods of economic growth. Strong consumer demand may cause the shortages in production, and therefore firms tend to increase prices for their products during these periods of time, which results in demand pull inflation. So the interest rates affect the firm in two ways. So first of all, it affects the operating expenses of the firm, and it affects the revenues of the firm. So firms tend to closely monitor the changes in interest rates because it affects the cost of borrowing money. Some of the possible projects that the firm consider when the interest rates are low may not be feasible when the interest rates increase. And therefore, companies tend to reduce expansion when the interest rates are high. So secondly, some of the products are purchased with the credits. For example, when consumers buy houses, they make a small down payment and obtain loan to cover the remainder of the purchase price. However, when the interest rates are high, customers may not be able to afford high monthly payments on a loan. So therefore, increasing the interest rates causes the demand for new homes to decline, and therefore firms building houses may experience the decline in business. So the performance of firms is highly affected by the prices they charge for their output and the price of their materials and supplies. Prices of products and supplies are highly affected by the demand and supply conditions. So let's consider the example of personal computers. So in the following table, in the first column, you may see different prices for PCs. Also, the second column and third column represents the demand and supply schedule. So let's consider the demand schedule. So when the price for personal computer is at the $3,000, then the 8,000 units are demanded by consumers. So at the other extreme, when the price falls to $1,000, 25,000 units are demanded by customers. Therefore, the quantity demanded is higher when the price is lower, and the supply schedule represents the quantity supplied by firms at each possible price level. When the price for a PC is $3,000, then the quantity supplied by firms equals 30,000 units. When the price falls to $1,000, the quantity supplied by the company equals 10,000 units. Which means at high level of prices, companies are willing to supply more, meaning that quantity supplied is higher when the price increases. At a relatively high price, in this case $3,000 per unit, the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded, resulting in a surplus of products. So at the price of $3,000, the quantity supplied equals 30,000 units, compared to the quantity demanded of 8,000 units, which means there is a surplus of 22,000 units. So the surplus occurs when consumers are unwilling to purchase goods at the excessive price. So when the price for personal computers is low, then the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied, resulting in so-called shortage. So for example, at the price of $1,000, the quantity demanded equals 25,000 units, and the quantity supplied equals 10,000 units, resulting in a 15,000 unit shortage. In the following graph, you may notice that at the price of $2,000, the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded, equals 18,000 units at which there is no shortage or surplus. Price at which the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied is called the equilibrium price. To influence the economic conditions, the government implements monetary and fiscal policies. The central bank determines the monetary policy by setting the money supply level and determining the interest rates. And therefore, it directly affects the firm's interest expense. Slide 19. When the central bank increases the money supply, the interest rates tend to fall, and therefore this stimulates the economic growth. On the other hand, when the central bank reduces the money supply, the interest rates tend to increase, and therefore it discourages firms and consumers from borrowing. So basically there are two types of fiscal policy: expansionary and contractionary. During expansionary fiscal policy, the government tends to increase the spending and also reduce the tax rates.
Contractionary fiscal policy implies reduced government spending and/or increased tax rates. There are three main types of taxes, including personal income tax, corporate, and excise taxes. So when personal income tax falls, this increases the after-tax income of consumers, and therefore this increases the spending on goods and services.
Secondly, fiscal policy may also affect the after-tax earnings of companies by influencing the corporate tax rate. So and finally, excise taxes are imposed on particular types of goods and services, which increases their cost of production. This tax may discourage consumption of particular types of goods such as alcohol or tobacco by indirectly affecting their price. So thank you very much.